Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So, we've done a lot of episodes of Know Your Unit, explaining what makes a unit good, but we haven't really done any episodes talking about overrated units specifically. So, that's what I wanted to do. Now, don't get me wrong, when I say a unit is overrated, I'm not saying it's bad by any means. What I'm saying is that typically the value that the unit holds in a lot of people's minds is potentially a little bit skewed. Now, this again, if you're using a particular unit, cool, great. If you're having fun, you're doing your team build right. But when it comes to a few notions out there, there's some things that are just downright weird. So, for example, one of the common little things that come out there is this notion that white knights are essentially going to be better than knights. That there's no reason to use knights when the white knight exists. It's got Rampart Aura. That means it's a knight, you guys. That's the only thing that they're there for. But every unit that uses Rampart Aura has a different reason for using it. So, for example, let's say somebody like the Terenius. Are they your area denial specialist? No. They use Rampart Aura to essentially weaponize Lament of the Dead. Stuff gets caught in the little net around them, they hit it with Lament of the Dead. That is a lot of debuffs getting spread out. When it comes to the Knight, do they potentially use Rampart Aura for the purpose of only area denial? Not specifically. They're able to combine it together with Phalanx in order to be able to essentially tank the hits from any units that are nearby there, allowing them to essentially just kind of sit and push lines wherever they need to. Awkwardly holding territory is their thing. Holding territory using very basic heals, using items and whatever else, as well as a lot of finishers that, for example, do DOT damage. That's going to be their bread and butter. Slow and steady is the Knight's game. Being able to outlast everything is what they do. In the case of the White Knight, though, they're actually more of a Berserker variant than they are an actual Knight variant. The White Knight is an assault unit. It's not a defense unit. So, for example, while they do have Rampart Aura, this doesn't mean that they are strictly holding a front line. Could they be used for that in a pinch? Sure, but just like everybody else, unlike the Knight, they don't have a skill that's able to just completely nullify damage. For those unfamiliar, Phalanx is one of the best defense abilities in the game, bar none. Most of them have some sort of stipulation, like Evade or Ivory Tower will go and block physical attacks. Intercession will block anything that counts as magical. Something like, let's say, Mind's Eye requires a melee attack. Something like let's say Preempt, again, requires a close range attack. But in the case of the White Knight, essentially they don't have any skill like that. All of their skills are offense orientated. Essentially, they are made as a strike group kind of unit. In their particular case, they've got access to Guardian Force for helping their units that are nearby. They've got Paralysis Blade for stunning units that are attacking, and they've got Velocity Shift for boosting units nearby. Essentially, roughly like a three-man squad is what they're looking to use as their little assault group. And in this case, they're using Rampart Aura much in the same way that you might use it in something like the One Vision mod, wherein they attack and they prevent units from potentially getting around their small squad. They're an offensive version of the area denial kind of archetype here. So, like in their particular case, it just prevents those units from getting around, and it's kind of similar to a few other examples in the game here, but they themselves are not a front line. They are not a brick wall that nothing can get past. They still have their elemental weaknesses, like in the case of the Knight there. Even if they're hit with their weakness attack, 90% reduction is 90% reduction. That's still essentially going to plink off more or less. Even if something's doing 1,000, suddenly it's only doing 100. It's a very, very kind of unique thing there. Again, only a few units can do this. Dragons can do that with Reflection, but in their particular case, they don't really have much in the way of long-term recovery options. Knights have their basic heals, and they've got their items, which obviously everyone's got items, but still, they can rely on their basic heals to make up for the fact that just nothing's hurting them, right? They can literally just sit there and heal, and what's going to kill them? A couple of auto cards and they're functionally immortal. In the case of the White Knight, they don't have that variant, but they do have those heals as well as an Awaken ability, which is kind of oddly specific, but whatever. In their particular case, again, they are the offensive version. Their Rampart Aura is for the purpose of shepherding units away from being able to counterattack or whatnot. So their roles are entirely different. They serve entirely different purposes. This guy is a guard, right? He guards a staircase, he guards a walkway, he guards an awkward path. He essentially sits there, he takes the most common cards in the game, turns them into immortality, takes the most basic heals in the game, turns them into immortality, and then he can even weaponize this through something like, let's say, using his shot grenades over here to go and just do pretty darn solid damage, despite the fact that he's effectively just a brick wall. In their case, again, 90% damage is 90% damage reduction against everything. So hold out a grenade in your hand, and that's still getting 90% of its damage removed. Something like turning on a dodge and then using, let's say, a cutlass to just go and drop false strike on things. Suddenly, that is a lot of accuracy that's lost. Oh, well, he's not doing much damage. Okay, but you can just poison something that's nearby. His whole job is just blocking an area and making things awkward. This guy's job is taking new ground. It's kind of like, let's say, between them, like, this guy would, in, I guess, more real-world parlance, just essentially be just a defensive line, right? Essentially, he's just... It's kind of like comparing a trench with a tank formation. They're just built for entirely different things, right? They don't serve the same role whatsoever. And the thing is, the only other units, again, that are able to block off areas or deny damage as well as this guy can are going to be the dragon, who can only heal with items, and going to be the golem, who can only heal with items. And in both of their cases, like, the golem will block more area, but he can't sustain himself. In the case of the dragon, they can reflect that damage back and they can drop debuffs, but again, they can't sustain themselves, and additionally, neither of those two has access to a weapon skill in order to weaponize shot grenades. In the case of the White Knight, the reason that, again, I'm saying that they're a Berserker is because while the Berserker sweeps, this guy essentially cleans up behind them. One of the big flaws that the Berserker has is that once they're in there, somebody can get around to their back, so that they can be surrounded, they can be isolated. In the case of the White Knight, they're essentially a Berserker variant that not only stuns things around them to prevent that from happening, ideally, and potentially does all of this while blocking the area off to their sides, essentially allowing them to, again, serve as a more team-orientated Berserker in a way, right? Last thing I want to mention here, because this one's kind of the one that tends to get pointed to a lot, when it comes to the numbers. When it comes to certain characters, namely the Zenobians as well as a few others, every single unit that has access to the White Knight has the pretty privilege thing going on. That effectively, Murden, Gildas, and Ravnus all will have roughly like 10 to 20 extra stats across the board for everything. And this is very noticeable. For example, even Azelston, who comes in later, essentially is comparable to or less in pretty much every category. When you end up getting them. And additionally, it's worth noting that I was originally going to, actually, let's just go ahead and do a quick 1v1 while we're talking about this. I was going to have them go 1v1 each other, just to kind of show this off, but honestly, it's kind of a bad example, because it doesn't really explain much of anything as far as what makes them as good as they are. Anyway, but still, the main thing that I want to get across here is that having access to Rampart Aura does not necessarily mean that a unit is a area denial guy. It means that they've got that particular thing on hand. It means that they have that particular they have the ability to block some tiles, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they all use it in the same way. Again, Terenites weaponize this courtesy of being able to trap everybody in their Lament of the Dead. Something like a White Knight uses them to sweep away units to the side, essentially like a forward flank maneuver there. Preventing an area from being attacked from the side, let's say. Whereas the Knight is the one that's slowly marching forward and just kind of doing things as they go along, right? So, either way, that's kind of the main takeaway from all this. That despite everything, despite the number of different options available to them, White Knight is the assault variant, and Knight is the defensive variant. Now, in this particular case, what I decided to do is, for the purpose of this 1v1 here, I decided to give a poisonous weapon over to him. I decided to give a poisonous finisher over to him. Honestly, we probably should just not be doing the poison stuff whatsoever, because this is just going to equalize out more or less. And mostly what it comes down to is who's going to be rolling what until they pick up auto cards. But the actual difference between them is surprisingly minor. In terms of their actual potential against each other, whereas for example in terms of defense, it's a very, very noticeable gap between them. Like, you'll notice, despite the massive gap in stats, what are you seeing between these two fighting each other? You're seeing that, okay, despite there being an HP advantage, they're both weaponizing poison in this case, and the guy with more health is obviously getting hit a bit more. Even despite doing additional damage, you'll notice that Murden is starting to fall behind at this point. that he's basically hoping that that stun rolls, and this is off of Phalanx only activating once so far. And this is on top of the fact that at any point, if his Phalanx does roll, we're in a position that, let's say, he decides to go back up, goes for a heal, and then picks up this convenient skill card that popped up here. Now what we're talking about is a case that if he, let's say, just survives long enough for his Phalanx to activate, he basically just gets to weaponize his defense at that point, right? Again, completely different roles between these two, completely different stuff that they can be doing. Like, he's going to try and maintain that stun, but, you know, maybe that might not necessarily be what he needs anyway. Alright, anyways, so hopefully you get the general idea here between these two, as far as like the White Knight being quote-unquote overrated. Don't get me wrong, White Knights are freaking amazing. You should be using them all the time, but it's Velocity Shift and Paralysis Blade that make them good. They are not an area denial guy. Like, it's technically a thing that they can do, but it's not really their main bread and butter, you know? Plus, also, like, this is just freaking awesome. Anyway, so that will be about that, give or take. I'm waiting for this fight to finish here at some point. Anyway, hopefully you got the idea. So that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. You take care, and if we can get this fight wrapped up so we can actually close it off, that would be fantastic. Because apparently we're just gonna awkwardly awkwardly run into stun shenanigans here. Attempt to end it, number 4, coming in relatively soonish here. You know, he's gonna continue melting away, and then we'll probably just have one of them self-destruct here. Hell, you know what? Even with all of their additional bonuses, let's go ahead and have them do their Spiral Scourge here, go for one big move here, and it does next to nothing. Because Phalanx is just that good. So yeah. And, I mean, stun does last a while, so there is that. Paralysis Blade does actually last a decently long time. But, like, literally, as far as the difference between them, it doesn't matter. The stats do not matter as much as people think they matter in Reborn. Skills matter, weird effects matter, debuffs really matter, but yeah. Even, for example, even Breach, one of the most powerful debuffs in the game, even Fear, even in those cases, they barely have an edge over something like a Knight, just due to the fact that, again, 90% damage reduction is completely fucking broken. It's a really broken ability. It's what makes them the premier tank. It only takes, like, 1 or 2 cards to make them damn near immortal. Whereas this guy's role is, again, entirely different. Being able to give everybody a bunch of speed boosts, being able to clear off areas at a flank. That is their role. It is a totally different role. Okay? So anyways, yes, you should still be using a Knight. You should not be replacing your Knights with White Knights. And as far as their gear choices, yeah, we could have gone for Relics, but it really wouldn't have made much of a difference, considering I wanted to make this at least somewhat fair for Murden, because Poison's about his only shot to actually do anything, you know, to actually take advantage of this here. Like, look at their higher-end damage options as far as weapons go. Like, we could have gone maybe Axes or something. That might give him an advantage. This guy's Lightning. He's got Infinity. That could do something, but again, 90% damage reduction. Like, that was basically the only other option here, to just run full Relics, and then the complaint would have been, wait, but why does the Knight get the better Relics? Because, you know, they're both just running Aegis at that point, so everybody's just running, you know, still Poison. Because at that point, it still would have been Vile Wound to poison him. So this was Murden's best shot of actually winning, of just locking them into Chapter 4 generic store gear and giving him a Poisonous Spear. Because ultimately it would just come down to poison there. Anyway, that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one, and I hope it was entertaining. See ya.